Alright guys, what's up? So today we're going to be talking about northern and southern differences. So we're really looking at those key differences between the north and the south. Okay, we already talked about the abolitionists. Now we're going to focus in on the northern and southern differences. One thing you guys should have out and be ready to be working on is your guided viewing notes. If you don't have a piece of paper like this from Mr. Milius, you can go ahead and draw that in your composition book. Okay, and if you need a quick shot at what that looks like, bam, that's what it looks like, guys. You're focusing in on the key events, influential individuals and groups, connections to past and future, and then at the very end, of course, you're going to write your summary. All right, so let's get down to it. We got north and south, north and southern differences. North and south developed very different economies, so the way that they made money was very different. In the north, they developed more industry and commerce, that's like trade and businesses, and in the south, there was a huge focus on plantation farming. And what did we grow on plantation farms? We grew cotton, okay? We passed this around. You guys all should have had a chance to really take a fine look at cotton. But that becomes the basis or the most important part of the southern economy. Going back, let's talk about the north a little bit more. We have in the Industrial Revolution, okay? The northern economy was based on the Industrial Revolution. During the Industrial Revolution, factory machines replaced hand tools and large-scale manufacturing replaced farming. So instead of everybody working on a small farm and kind of growing everything that they need, there was a focus on building factories that could mass produce stuff. So like nowadays we have factories that build stuff like cell phones. But back in the day, they were mass producing other things, and it could be anywhere from furniture to mechanical stuff like cars, but it definitely changes the focus on how people in the north make a living, okay? Factory system, let's get my face out of the way, there we go. Factory system brought workers and machines together. People left farms and crowded into cities where the factories were. So instead of, again, living on those farms with their families, you see people moving into cities, they live in apartments, changes everything. People left the farms, crowded into cities where the factories were. That way you could live in one building and then walk down the street to the factory that you work in, work there, and then go back to your building or your apartment complex at the end of the day. Much of the population came from immigration. We've talked about the Irish a lot. Germans and European immigrants came in as well. And that made up most of the population in the Northeast. Many immigrants also moved west, but maintained connections to Northerners. Now this is important because the people that are moving out west are going to be more like-minded to the people in the Northeast. So we got to remember that when we are talking about those differences between Northerners and Southerners. Okay? All right, South, it depends on slavery. Again, this stuff right here, Cotton King, there we go, King Cotton, okay? Controlled by a few wealthy landowning planters. So most of the South and the cotton that is grown is controlled by a few wealthy people, okay, not the majority. They made a lot of money from the free labor of slaves. This is why slavery becomes so important, because of that demand for cotton. Most profits came from trade, especially cotton, so they would produce it, grow it, slaves would harvest it, organize it, clean it. That's where that cotton gin comes in, and they got to get all these little seeds that make the cotton basically impure, get those out, and then they can package it up and start selling it. Planters invest in slaves to harvest cotton instead of industry. So instead of trying to have buildings and factories created, they just invest in buying slaves. That's their investment, okay? Slaves and land. And those two things are very profitable because slaves, I mean, you got to feed them and clothe them, but they didn't feed them very well, or clothe them very well for that matter. But the profit margin is massive when you can produce and sell this stuff, okay? Most Southern whites were poor farmers who owned no slaves. All right, guys, sorry, a little interruption there. So let's get to the right presentation. So, yeah. All right, going back to this, most Southern whites were poor farmers who owned no slaves. So the one thing that you got to remember about this is, even though most Southern whites owned no slaves, they were still technically above slaves if you look at them in a social status kind of frame of mind. So there was African American slaves, African Americans that were free, right? And then you had poor whites. So even though they didn't own slaves and profit from having slaves take care of the cotton farming for them, they still had aspirations that one day that they could own slaves and that they were still above somebody else in that kind of social hierarchy. So definitely something to keep in mind when we're considering the South pre-Civil War. All right, the one thing that you guys got to really kind of think about is that this differences between North and South actually leads to a bunch of tension. That tension comes to a head in what becomes the Missouri Compromise. North and South develop different beliefs about slavery. In the North, there's 11 free states. In the South, there's 11 slave states. 1817, Missouri comes along and wants to be added as a slave state, which would change that balance. If you lose that balance, slave states become more powerful. Compromise that is come to so that both the free states and slave states are both happy is that we would add Maine as a free state and Missouri as a slave state. In addition, they're going to ban slavery in the Louisiana Territory south of the 3630 parallel. So what's that look like? That's this line right here. Anything below it is going to be a slave territory or state. Anything above it is going to be free. Okay? Missouri Compromise, again, adds Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, maintaining that balance. And the real kicker here, the most important thing you got to realize about the Missouri Compromise is it's the first time the United States as a whole has to deal with this issue of slavery. It's not just something a state or this state's taking care of, but the whole country has to vote on this. So keep that in mind, guys. Big differences between North and South, and then that first real compromise, when that first time the country has to deal with slavery, the Missouri Compromise, 1820. All right, guys. Good luck.